They say a mother's love never fades. But what if the child you raised, fed, and sacrificed everything for looked you in the eye and called you a burden? I still remember that morning, the chill in the air, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the sound of my phone vibrating on the counter. It was 7:30 in the morning, and the sun had barely lifted over the pine trees outside my kitchen window. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the phone, expecting a "Good morning, Mom" from my son. But what I read instead sliced through me like glass. "Mom, I think it's best if we keep a little distance for now. Vivian feels uncomfortable with how often you call and visit. Please understand." I stared at those words as if they were written in another language. A little distance? I blinked, thinking maybe it was a joke. My son Benjamin had always been my pride, the boy who once ran to me with scraped knees, the boy who promised, "I'll take care of you when I grow up, Mom." And now, distance. My hands trembled as I typed back, "Did I do something wrong?" Then I waited. 1 minute, 2, 10, no answer. Just that tiny scene mark mocking me on the screen. I sat down at the kitchen table, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. 6 years ago, when Benjamin married Vivian, I told myself to stay out of their way. I helped them with their down payment, offered them a spare car, even covered the hospital bills when my granddaughter Sophie was born. Every time they needed help, I gave, never expecting anything in return. I gave because that's what mothers do. That's what love does. But over time, Vivian began to change the air in every room I entered. Her smile was polite, her tone was soft, but behind it I could feel the stiffness, the quiet disapproval. When I came by to drop off cookies, she would glance at the clock and say, "Oh, you're early." When I tried to play with Sophie, she would sigh, "She needs her nap now." Still, I told myself it was nothing. I convinced myself she was just tired, adjusting to motherhood. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want Benjamin to feel torn between us. So I swallowed the hurt, one cold glance at a time. Until that morning when the text finally told me what my heart had feared all along. They didn't want me around anymore. I set my phone down, took a deep breath, and looked around my kitchen. The flowers on the counter were wilted. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I had spent years building a home where my son could always feel safe, but now it felt like a museum of memories, pictures on the wall of a family that no longer existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the streetlights shimmer on the pavement, and I thought about every sacrifice I'd ever made. Working double shifts at the diner so Benjamin could go to college, skipping doctor appointments to save money for his first car, selling my jewelry to help him through tough times. All those choices that had cost me pieces of myself. I had always believed love was about giving everything you could, but now I wondered if I had given too much. 3 days passed with no call. On the 4th day, I received a message, not from Benjamin, but from Vivian. Her words were polite but sharp. "Hi, Heather. I think it's better for everyone if we take some space. Sophie is confused when you come over unannounced, and it disrupts her schedule. Hope you understand. Hope you understand." That phrase repeated in my head like an echo I couldn't escape. Hope you understand. Hope you disappear. Hope you stop trying. That was the day I realized something. People rarely tell you when they stop loving you. They just make you feel like your presence is a problem until you choose to leave on your own. I decided not to reply. I deleted the message, turned off my phone, and let silence speak for me. Weeks went by. I didn't visit. I didn't call. And though the quiet was unbearable at first, something inside me began to shift. For the first time in years, I had mornings that belonged only to me. I brewed my coffee slowly, read the newspaper at my own pace, walked to the park without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I started to remember who I was before I became someone's mother, someone's bank, someone's shadow. But then, one Sunday afternoon, as I sat by the window sketching the maple tree outside, a soft knock came at the door. When I opened it, I saw Benjamin standing there, eyes tired, hands buried in his jacket pockets. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. I forced a smile. Benjamin, what brings you here? He hesitated. Can I come in? We sat at the kitchen table just like old times. He didn't meet my eyes. His voice trembled. Things have been tough. Vivian lost her job. The mortgage is behind. I didn't know who else to ask. There it was, the familiar ache. The part of me that wanted to fix everything, to make it right, to hold him like when he was little. But I stayed still. I asked softly, "Are you asking for help?" He nodded. Just until we get back on track. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. For a moment, I almost said yes. But then I saw it, the pattern. The giving, the taking, the cycle of love measured in dollars. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Benjamin, I can't do that anymore." He looked stunned. "What do you mean?" "You've always helped me." I met his gaze. "I've always helped because I wanted to see you grow. But if my help keeps you from standing on your own, then I'm not helping. I'm holding you back." Silence filled the room. Then he stood, disappointment heavy in his eyes. "I guess I shouldn't have come." He walked out, closing the door behind him, and I stood there trembling, not from guilt, but from strength. For the first time, I had chosen myself. That night, I cried, not out of regret, but out of release. Because love, I realized, isn't proven by how much pain you can endure for someone else. Sometimes the bravest kind of love is the one that learns to let go. The next morning, I woke up to a house so quiet it almost felt sacred. The sunlight fell through the curtains like soft gold ribbons, but even that warmth couldn't fill the emptiness that lingered after Benjamin walked out the night before. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, my mind replaying his expression. The confusion, the disappointment, the disbelief that his mother had said no for the first time in his life. But under the ache, there was something else. A flicker of peace. For years, I had given so much that I forgot what it felt like to have boundaries. Now, for the first time, I was standing inside them. The phone didn't ring for days. No messages, no missed calls, no updates. The world outside my window went on as usual. Children playing, cars passing by, the sound of dogs barking in the distance. But my small corner of the world was wrapped in stillness. And yet I didn't feel empty. I began to fill the silence with small, beautiful things. I went back to painting, something I hadn't done since my 20s. I painted the maple tree outside, the soft blush of the sunset over the hills, the fragile petals of the lilies in my garden. My brush strokes felt clumsy at first, but with each stroke I felt my heart loosen. The colors became my voice when words failed. One afternoon, as I was rinsing my brushes, the doorbell rang. It was Martha, my best friend for over 30 years. She stood there holding a basket of muffins and a knowing smile. "You've been too quiet, Heather," she said, stepping inside. "And you know what quiet means. You're either baking revenge pies or healing your soul. Which one is it this time?" I laughed, and for the first time in weeks, the sound didn't feel forced. "Maybe a bit of both," I said. We sat by the window sipping tea. Martha studied me with that wise, protective gaze she'd always had. "I heard a little something," she said gently, "about Benjamin and Vivian." My stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Vivian's been talking at her yoga studio. Bragging, actually. She said you finally stopped hovering, that now she can finally have her house the way she wants it. Heather, she's turning your old room into a walk-in closet. $35,000 on renovations." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My throat felt dry, my vision blurry. "My room?" I whispered. Martha nodded slowly. "And Benjamin, he knows. He's been helping her move your things into storage." I sat back, stunned. All the memories, the laughter, the holidays, the baby giggles echoing through those walls, all of it was being replaced by designer handbags and vanity mirrors. It wasn't about space. It was about erasing me. I tried to swallow the pain, but it pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. "Why would he let that happen?" I finally managed to say. Martha reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. "Because sometimes love blinds people, and sometimes it makes them weak." That night, after she left, I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed. I stared at the photo of Benjamin and me from his graduation day, his arm around my shoulders, his smile wide, my pride glowing brighter than the sun behind us. How did we end up here? How did love turn into distance and gratitude into entitlement? I didn't cry that night. Instead, I prayed, not for Benjamin to change, but for my heart to understand. I whispered into the dark, God, help me let go without bitterness. Help me love without losing myself. 2 months passed. I heard through neighbors that Benjamin and Vivian were struggling. Money problems, constant fights. Rumors spread that Vivian's luxury spending had spiraled out of control. But I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat, I didn't call, I didn't show up. Sometimes silence is the only truth left to give. Then, one rainy evening, as I was reading on the couch, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and there stood Benjamin. His clothes were soaked, his eyes hollow. For a second I saw the boy he used to be, scared, lost, ashamed. Mom, he said softly, can I come in? I nodded, moving aside. He stood in the living room, dripping water onto the floor, his shoulders slumped. Vivian left, he whispered. She took Sophie and went to her mother's. The house? It's gone. We couldn't keep up with the payments. The words hung heavy between us. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the house, but for the emptiness in his voice. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. You were right. I didn't see it until it was too late. I let her control everything, even how I treated you. I thought I was protecting my family, but I destroyed it. Tears filled his eyes, and for a moment, I wanted to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I couldn't do that anymore. Love didn't mean erasing accountability. Benjamin, I said gently, I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how things were. You have to rebuild, not with my money, but with your strength. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I want to make things right. I'll pay back what I owe you. Every dollar, I smiled faintly. That's not what I need. I just need you to learn what love really means. Respect, honesty, and standing on your own 2 feet. We sat in silence for a long while, the rain tapping softly on the windows. Then he asked, Can I see Sophie? Yes, I said after a pause, but only if you bring her here yourself. I want her to know her grandmother, but I also want her to see the kind of man her father is becoming. For the first time that night, Benjamin smiled, small, uncertain, but real. When he left, I stood by the window watching him disappear into the rain. Something inside me shifted again. I realized that pain had a strange way of purifying love, stripping away the illusions until only truth remained. I didn't need to be needed anymore. I just needed to be true to myself. As I turned off the lights and walked toward my room, I whispered, This isn't the end. It's just a new beginning. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The days that followed were heavy with a quiet kind of healing, the kind that doesn't come with tears or noise, but with stillness. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window, and for once, I didn't reach for my phone. I brewed my coffee slowly, inhaling the rich aroma, and sat by the window watching the world wake up. Life had slowed down, and in that stillness, I could finally hear my own heart again. Benjamin called me every few days now. The first time it was awkward, filled with pauses, guilt, and the soft weight of regret. But over time, the pauses grew shorter, and the words came easier. He talked about looking for work, about trying to rebuild his life, about how much he missed Sophie. Each conversation felt like another thread stitching us back together, not in the same old way, but in a new, more fragile, more honest one. One evening, about 3 weeks after that rainy night, he called and said quietly, Mom, can I come by tomorrow? Sophie wants to see you. My breath caught in my chest. It had been almost a year since I'd last held that little girl in my arms. Of course, I whispered, my voice trembling. Of course, bring her. I barely slept that night. I cleaned the house twice, baked chocolate chip cookies, her favorite, and set her old toy basket by the living room couch. When morning came, I found myself standing by the window long before they arrived, my hands shaking as I watched the street. And then I saw them. Benjamin's car pulled up and the door opened. Sophie jumped out first, taller now, her curls bouncing, wearing a little yellow raincoat despite the clear sky. When she saw me, her eyes lit up, and before I could even move, she ran straight into my arms. "Grandma!" she squealed, wrapping her small arms around my neck. For a moment, the world stood still. I buried my face in her hair, breathing in that sweet scent of childhood, shampoo, sunshine, and innocence. My heart ached in the best way possible. Benjamin stood at the door, watching us quietly. He looked exhausted but different, softer, humbled. I smiled at him and said, "Come in, honey." We sat together at the kitchen table, and for the first time in years, it felt like a home again. Sophie chattered endlessly about school, her friends, the new kitten she wanted, while Benjamin listened with that faraway look fathers get when they're realizing how much time they've lost. When Sophie went to the backyard to play, Benjamin sighed. "I don't deserve this," he said softly. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You don't have to deserve love, Benjamin. You just have to respect it. Love isn't earned by perfection, it's built by choice." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'm trying, Mom. I really am." "I know," I said, reaching across the table and taking his hand. "And that's all that matters." After they left that afternoon, I sat in the silence again, but this time, it felt peaceful, not lonely. I realized something powerful. Forgiveness doesn't just heal the one who's forgiven. It frees the one who gives it. Weeks turned into months. Benjamin found a steady job at a local construction company. He called every weekend, came by with Sophie every other Sunday. We started having dinners together, simple meals filled with laughter, quiet apologies, and the slow rebuilding of trust. He was different now, more grounded, more aware. I could see it in the way he looked at me, and in the way he looked at his daughter. But even as my heart healed, I couldn't ignore the scars. Sometimes at night, when the house grew too quiet, I'd think back to all the times I had been dismissed, overlooked, used, not just by Benjamin, but by people who mistook kindness for weakness. I had spent so much of my life trying to be indispensable that I'd forgotten how to simply be. One evening, as I was watching the sunset, Martha called. "You sound lighter," she said, her voice warm. "I can hear it through the phone," I smiled. "Maybe because I'm finally learning that peace isn't something you wait for. It's something you build." She laughed softly. "Look at you, turning into a poet again." After we hung up, I walked outside and sat on the porch, watching the colors fade into twilight. My thoughts drifted back to Benjamin and the long, painful road that had brought us here. I wondered if Sophie would remember any of this when she grew older. Not the pain, but the healing. I hoped she would. I hoped she'd learn that family isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for. A few days later, Benjamin came by with an envelope in his hand. "Mom," he said, setting it on the table. "This is the first payment. I promised I'd pay back what I owe." I opened it, a check for $3,000. I looked up at him and said gently, "You don't have to do this." He shook his head firmly. "Yes, I do. It's not about the money anymore. It's about responsibility. I want Sophie to see that I keep my word." Tears filled my eyes, but I smiled. "I'm proud of you, Benjamin." He looked away, his jaw tight. I wish I'd listened sooner. I reached up and cupped his cheek, just like I did when he was a boy. We all learn when we're ready, not before. When he left, I sat there staring at the envelope, feeling the weight of everything that had changed. Not long ago, that same table had been where my heart broke. Now, it was where it healed. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Sometimes love has to let the walls fall before it can rebuild. Sometimes silence is where you hear God the clearest." As I closed the notebook, I whispered to myself, "This isn't the ending I once dreamed of. But maybe it's the one I needed." And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, beautifully enough. The morning sun spilled through the thin curtains, landing softly across my face, and for a brief second I thought it was just another day. The kind of morning where I'd hear my son's laughter echoing through the hallway, or the sweet squeal of my granddaughter running toward me with open arms. But all that was gone. The house was still. The silence was heavy, and it had a way of making me feel both invisible and trapped at the same time. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that even the dust on the nightstand had started to settle where life used to move. I made coffee, the same way I had for years, 2 sugars and a little milk. And as the kettle began to whistle, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. My hair had more gray now, my eyes less sparkle, my hands more fragile than I remembered. But it wasn't the years that aged me. It was the disappointment, the betrayal, the way love had been misunderstood and used against me. I sat down at the kitchen table, a place where laughter used to live. There were memories in every corner. The birthday cake Benjamin blew candles on when he turned 10, the mornings I'd pack his lunch before school, the way he'd come home, sweaty from soccer practice, and crash right there on the floor, asking what was for dinner. I smiled a little, then felt the sting behind my eyes. That kind of ache doesn't fade, it just learns how to hide. The phone sat beside my coffee mug, dark and silent. It used to buzz with messages, calls, reminders that I was still part of someone's life. Now it was nothing more than a quiet witness to the distance that had grown between us. I scrolled through old photos sometimes, Benjamin holding baby Sophie, Vivian's smile, our family trips, and every time, it felt like I was watching strangers pretending to be happy. The truth was, I didn't even recognize the woman I used to be. I had given too much. My money, my time, my energy, my forgiveness, to people who never once stopped to ask how I was really doing. I kept trying to earn their love when, deep down, love shouldn't have been something I needed to buy. That afternoon, I decided to clean the house. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to feel useful again. I started with Benjamin's old room. The air smelled faintly of his cologne, the same one he wore as a teenager. His trophies lined the shelves, his guitar leaned against the wall, untouched for years. I ran my fingers across the dust and whispered, "Where did we lose each other, Ben?" I remembered the day he moved out. He was 25, full of dreams, full of plans. He told me, "Mom, I'll always come back. You'll never be alone." But promises like that are fragile. They sound beautiful when spoken, but life has a way of eroding them. I guess I never realized how much distance can grow between hearts that once beat so close. By evening, the house was spotless, but inside, I felt empty. I sat on the porch as the sun went down, holding a letter I had written but never sent. It was to Benjamin. I wrote it weeks ago, after our last conversation. It said, "I'm sorry if I ever made you feel trapped by my love. I'm sorry if helping too much made you feel small. I never meant to control, I only meant to care. But I need you to know, son, that I'm learning to let go. Not because I stopped loving you, but because I finally realized love shouldn't hurt like this." I folded the letter, pressed it against my heart, and whispered a prayer. Not for reconciliation, not even for understanding, but for peace. Because peace felt like the only thing I hadn't tried to fight for. The wind picked up a little, brushing through the trees, carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle. I closed my eyes and let it touch my face. It was strange, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt seen. Not by people, but by something deeper, something divine. Maybe this was what grace felt like. Quiet, patient, healing in the background, even when you didn't deserve it. Later that night, as I sat in bed, a memory came back to me. The day Benjamin broke his arm when he was 10. He was crying, scared, and I remember holding him so tightly, whispering, "You're safe. I'll never let go." That promise still burned in my heart. Maybe I couldn't hold him anymore. Not physically, not even emotionally, but I could still hold him in prayer. So that's what I did. I prayed. I prayed for his happiness, for Vivian's peace, for Sophie's innocence to stay untouched by adult pain. And I prayed for myself, that I might learn to live again without bitterness. As I turned off the light, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an apology or a visit that might never come. I was waiting for something else. For the quiet kind of healing that only comes when you stop chasing closure and start building peace with what is. I fell asleep to the sound of rain tapping on the window, and in that soft rhythm, I found comfort. The kind of comfort that doesn't erase the pain but reminds you that even the storm has a purpose. In the middle of the night, I woke up and went to the kitchen for water. The moonlight shone through the window, landing right on that unsent letter. I picked it up again, hesitated, then smiled through tears. Maybe I didn't need to send it after all. Maybe the act of writing it, the act of forgiving, was enough. And as I stood there, holding that letter under the glow of the moon, I realized something simple yet powerful. Love doesn't end when people walk away. It just finds a quieter place to live. That night, the echo of the empty house didn't sound so lonely anymore. It sounded like space. Space for new beginnings, for grace, for the kind of peace I had forgotten I deserved. The next morning came softly, the kind of morning that held no urgency, only the faint hum of life waking up outside my window. Birds were singing on the fence, the kettle hissed on the stove, and for the first time in months, my heart wasn't racing with anxiety the moment I opened my eyes. I sat by the window with my coffee, that same folded letter lying on the table beside me. It had become something sacred now, a quiet symbol of my decision to stop begging for love and start learning to live again. As the sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, I thought about sending it. I thought about what would happen if Benjamin read those words. Would he feel remorse? Would he even reply? Or would he simply read it and move on, as if my pain were just another thing he didn't have time for? The thought twisted something deep inside me. I didn't want pity. I wanted to be understood. But maybe that was too much to ask from someone who had already built walls around his heart. I picked up the letter again, ran my fingers along its edges and whispered, "You've already done your job." Then with a deep breath, I tore it into small pieces and dropped them into the trash. Each tear sounded like closure, like the cracking open of a door to something new. After breakfast, I put on my coat and walked into town. It had been months since I'd allowed myself to wander without purpose. The small bookstore at the corner was still there, with its old wooden sign and the scent of paper and dust that somehow felt like home. Inside, a young man with kind eyes greeted me. "Morning, ma'am. Looking for anything special?" I smiled softly. "Just something honest." He chuckled and handed me a small book with a worn cover titled, "The Courage to Begin Again." I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of those words. Maybe that was what I needed. Courage, not perfection. I bought it, along with a small notebook. I didn't know why yet, but something in me whispered that I was meant to start writing again. Not letters this time, but stories. When I got home, I sat on the porch, opened the notebook, and began to write. At first, it was awkward. My thoughts stumbled. My sentences felt too fragile. But as the hours passed, the pages started to fill with something real. Memories, lessons, small prayers, and truths I had never dared to say out loud. It felt like pouring light into the cracks of my soul. That evening, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I opened it. It said, "Mom, it's me, Benjamin. I know you probably don't want to talk, but I wanted to check if you're okay." I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part of me wanted to delete it and keep my peace untouched. But love, real love, doesn't vanish that easily. It lingers, even when it hurts. After a few minutes, I typed back, "I'm doing better than before. Thank you for asking." I pressed send, my heart pounding. I didn't expect a reply, but a few minutes later, another message appeared. "Vivian and we've been going through a rough time. Sophie asks about you sometimes." Tears filled my eyes as I whispered, "She remembers me." I could almost hear Sophie's giggle in my mind, the way she used to run toward me shouting, "Grandma!" That memory alone was enough to warm the coldest corners of my heart. I typed slowly, "Tell her I love her, always." No response came after that, but I didn't mind. That small exchange was enough. Enough to remind me that even broken bonds can still hold threads of love. Later that night, as I sat under the soft light of the lamp, I wrote in my notebook, "Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It's choosing peace over pain every single day." I closed the book and placed it beside my bed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I joined a local community group for women who had faced loss, not just of people, but of identity, trust, purpose. We met every Thursday evening at the church basement, sipping tea and sharing stories. There was something profoundly healing about listening to others speak their truths. Their pain mirrored mine, but their resilience inspired me. One woman, named Carol, had lost her son in an accident. Her strength amazed me. She said one night, "Grief doesn't end. It just learns how to walk beside you." I went home thinking about that, realizing that maybe what I was feeling wasn't loneliness anymore. It was the slow companionship of healing. On the first Sunday of spring, I decided to visit the park where Benjamin used to play as a boy. I sat on a bench under the old oak tree, watching families pass by. Laughter floated through the air. It was soft, familiar, almost holy. A little girl nearby was blowing bubbles, and for a moment, I imagined Sophie doing the same. That image brought tears, but this time they weren't bitter. They were pure. I whispered to the wind, "I forgive you, Ben, not because you deserve it, but because I need to be free." As the words left my lips, something inside me loosened. It felt like laying down a burden I'd carried for far too long. When I returned home, there was a small envelope in my mailbox. My name was written in Benjamin's handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside was a simple card that read, "Thank you, Mom. I don't know if I can fix everything, but I'm trying. Love, Ben." I held the card against my chest and cried, not the kind of tears that come from sorrow, but the kind that wash away years of weight. That night, I looked around my house and realized it didn't feel empty anymore. The silence was still there, but it was softer now, peaceful even. And as I lay in bed, I thought about that notebook on my nightstand, about the stories I was writing, the life I was rebuilding, and the love that had survived even the deepest hurt. For the first time in years, I whispered to myself before falling asleep, "I'm proud of you." And maybe that was the beginning of something even more beautiful than reconciliation, the rediscovery of my own worth. 2 weeks after Benjamin's letter arrived, I thought about it every morning as I poured my coffee. It sat on my kitchen table, the edges slightly curled, the ink fading from my constant touch. There was something in those simple words, "I'm trying," that echoed through me like a quiet promise, fragile but alive. I didn't dare to expect anything from it. Expectations had broken me once before, and I had no intention of rebuilding my hope just to watch it fall again. Still, part of me, the part that still remembered the sound of his laugh as a little boy, couldn't help but wonder what he was trying to fix. One rainy Thursday, as I sat by the window reading, a car pulled up in front of my house. I froze. Few people came by unannounced. My mind raced through possibilities until I saw him, Benjamin, stepping out of the car, holding a small paper bag. He looked older than I remembered, his hair thinner, his face lined with exhaustion. My heart pounded as I opened the door, unsure whether to smile or to cry. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling just enough for me to hear the weight behind it. "Hi, Ben," I managed to reply. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the sound of rain filling the gap between us. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "Of course." He walked in slowly, glancing around as if every corner held a memory he wasn't sure he was ready to face. He placed the paper bag on the table and said, "I brought you something. Your favorite apple pie, from Miller's Bakery." I smiled faintly. You remembered? How could I forget? He said, sitting down across from me. His voice cracked when he added, You used to bake it every Sunday. I poured 2 cups of tea and joined him. The steam rose between us, carrying the scent of cinnamon and old love. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, 2 people learning how to breathe the same air again. Finally, Benjamin looked up, his eyes glistening. Mom, I don't know how to start this. I've gone over 100 versions of what to say to you, but none of them sound right. You can just start with the truth, I said quietly. He nodded, took a deep breath, and said, Vivian left. She took almost everything from the house. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. Sophie's been asking for you every day. She keeps drawing pictures of the 2 of you in her notebook. I realized how cruel I'd been to take that from her. And from you. Tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them. You didn't just take Sophie from me, Ben. You took yourself, too. I lost both my son and my granddaughter in one day. He lowered his head, shame heavy on his shoulders. I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I want to be better. For Sophie. For myself. For you. We sat in silence again, but this time, it wasn't the heavy silence of resentment. It was softer, like the quiet right before dawn. After a while, I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. Trying is a good place to start. He looked at me, tears spilling down his cheeks. I miss you, Mom. I miss home. And that was it. The moment the walls between us finally began to crumble. He stayed for dinner that night. We didn't talk much about the past. Instead, we talked about Sophie, her favorite books, her drawings, her little garden at school. It was almost surreal hearing him speak with gentleness again. He helped me wash the dishes afterward, laughing awkwardly when he almost dropped a plate. Some things never change, I teased. Later, as he stood by the door, he said, Sophie would love to see you. Maybe this weekend? My heart fluttered, half afraid to believe it. I'd like that, I said softly. When he left, I stood by the window watching his car disappear down the road, the sound of rain still tapping against the glass. I whispered, Thank you, God. Not for the reunion, but for the strength to have waited long enough for it. That weekend, I met Sophie again. She came running across the park, her curls bouncing, her voice ringing through the air. Grandma! I knelt down, arms open, tears blurring my vision as she threw herself into my embrace. I missed you so much, she said, her little voice muffled against my coat. I missed you more than you'll ever know, I whispered, kissing the top of her head. Benjamin watched us from a few steps away, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, humility. When I looked at him, he mouthed, Thank you. We spent the afternoon feeding ducks, eating ice cream, and laughing like time had never stolen anything from us. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever truly is, but it was real. And real was enough. That evening, when they dropped me home, Sophie hugged me tightly and said, Daddy said you're coming to my school play next month. Will you really come? I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. She grinned, then ran to the car. Benjamin lingered by the gate for a moment. Mom, he said, I'm not asking you to forget. I just hope someday, maybe you can believe that I'm changing. I already see it, I replied. Don't stop now. As he drove away, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet peace, the kind that only comes when pain finally starts to lose its power. That night, I sat by the window again, writing in my notebook. The words flowed easily this time. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It walks slowly, hand in hand with time, wearing the face of forgiveness. The next few days were lighter. I started volunteering at the local shelter, painting murals with the children there. It gave me purpose, a reason to smile beyond my own story, and every now and then Benjamin would call, not to ask for anything, but simply to talk. One evening, after a long day at the shelter, I came home to find a package on my doorstep. Inside was a framed photo, Me, Benjamin, and Sophie at the park. On the back, he had written, "For the wall that used to feel too empty." I hung it in my living room, right above the fireplace. For years, that wall had been a symbol of what I'd lost. Now, it was a reminder of what could still be rebuilt. And as I looked at that photo, tears slid down my cheeks. Not of sadness, but of gratitude. Because even after everything, love had found its way back home. I whispered into the quiet of the house. This is what grace looks like. It had been nearly a month since that fragile afternoon at the park with Sophie. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, yet the shadow of the past still lingered in every corner of my home. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint echo in the hallway reminded me of the years I had poured into a life that others had treated like disposable property. I had my freedom, my dignity, and Sophie's love. But the betrayal of Benjamin and Vivian still echoed in my mind like a wound that refused to close. One Tuesday morning, while folding laundry in the living room, the doorbell rang. I hesitated, heart thumping in my chest. Who could it be this time? I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, I froze. It was Martha. But she looked tense, her face shadowed with concern. There was no warmth in her smile, just urgency. I opened the door cautiously. "Martha, what's wrong?" "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes searched mine, almost pleading. "And you're not going to like what I have to say." My heart sank. I gestured for her to sit on the couch. "Okay, tell me everything." She took a deep breath and sat down, wringing her hands nervously. For a moment there was silence, as if she were weighing her words carefully. Then she began. "Remember when Benjamin sent that message in the group chat? The one begging for help?" I nodded slowly, the memory hitting me like a cold wave. "Yes, what about it?" I stayed quiet back then because I was shocked. But afterward, I got angry, Martha admitted, looking me straight in the eyes. "So I called Vivian last Friday." My pulse quickened. "And what did she say?" Martha hesitated, then her voice dropped. She lied. About everything. There was no financial crisis, no sudden need for space. It was all a plan. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "A plan?" I whispered. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Vivian wanted you out, so she could remodel the house. That guest room, the one you always slept in, was going to be turned into a luxury dressing room. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors, LED lights, glossy shelves. She even had Pinterest designs ready. All of it, $35,000. And she believed you would never know." I couldn't speak for a moment, my throat closing. They spoke about me like I was nothing. Like I was a nuisance to be removed, Martha nodded, anger flashing in her eyes. "And it gets worse. Vivian said you were too clingy, that you couldn't leave them alone, that you always inserted yourself into their lives. But the money? They still needed that. They planned to keep the cash flowing without you in the picture." The words hit me like bricks. Keep the money, but not me. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to slow my racing heart. "They've been spending every cent you sent," Martha continued, pulling out her phone. She showed me Vivian's Instagram, filled with images of lavish dinners, designer handbags, weekend trips, all of it. And when Benjamin said they were struggling, it was all part of their story. I felt my blood boil. The exhaustion, the sacrifice, the years I had worked myself to the bone, and it was all a ticket for them to live a life of luxury while treating me like a burden. My hands shook as I listened. Martha's voice softened, though still heavy with frustration. "And Benjamin?" "He knew, he agreed to it. He wanted space. They planned it together." I staggered back to the window, needing air, needing to let the fury rise. "My son. My own child, complicit in this." "Yes," Martha said softly, placing her hand on mine. "I thought you had a right to know." I couldn't stay silent. The room felt cold, the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. Part of me wanted to scream, to call Benjamin and Vivian both, to let every word of pain and anger pour out. But another part of me, the part that had fought for self-respect, whispered, "Do not give them the satisfaction." What now? Martha asked, concern etched in her features. I shook my head slowly. Nothing. I'll keep doing what I've been doing. They've dug their own hole. Let them figure out how to climb out. Martha bit her lip. What if they lose the house? Then so be it, I said firmly. They'll learn that when you bite the hand that feeds you, sooner or later, you go hungry. For the next 60 days, I did nothing but observe. Silence became my shield. Silence became my weapon. 2 months of watching as their world began to crumble under the weight of their lies and selfishness. Some nights I sat with my hands trembling over my phone, ready to type, "All right, let's talk," only to remember the word burden scrawled across messages that still haunted me. I remembered the image of that $35,000 dressing room. I remembered the Instagram photos of extravagant dinners, cocktails, and designer handbags. I remembered the faces of those who treated me like I was disposable. And I stayed strong. Martha updated me sporadically, not because I asked, but because she knew I had the right to see the consequences of their choices. The first week, Benjamin negotiated a small extension on the mortgage, 5 extra days, no more. Then they borrowed a few thousand from Vivian's mother, barely enough to cover the payment. By the second week, their cable was cut. By the third week, gym memberships canceled, dinners disappeared. Their credit cards were maxed out, arguments flared, and whispers of divorce surfaced. I felt no joy in their suffering, yet a quiet sense of justice settled over me. They had chosen greed over love, manipulation over honesty. And now, the world was simply reflecting back the choices they had made. One Saturday afternoon, Benjamin came alone. I was reading on my balcony when the doorbell rang. 3 hesitant chimes. Through the peephole I saw him, slouched, tired, unshaven, his polished appearance replaced with exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I didn't open the door immediately. I watched him press the bell, forehead resting against the door, pleading silently. "Mom, I know you're in there," he said softly. "Please, just listen to me. I messed everything up." I didn't move, though my heart clenched at the sound of his voice. He spoke of the lost house, of his mistakes, of Vivian's departure and Sophie's confusion. Each word cut through me, but I held my ground. When he finally left, footsteps fading, I allowed myself to collapse on the floor. Tears streamed freely, tears of grief, of sorrow, but also of quiet satisfaction. He had to learn the cost of betrayal. He had to face the consequences of choices made without respect, without care. A week later, Martha called again. Benjamin and Vivian were divorcing. Vivian had remarried, leaving Benjamin to pick up the pieces. The house was being forced to sell, the bank giving them an ultimatum. I listened in quiet serenity, feeling a strange, bittersweet mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. That night, I received a message from Sophie. A simple, trembling note. "Grandma, why don't you come over anymore?" "Don't you love me?" My chest ached, yet I understood. I called Benjamin the next day. His voice, once confident and selfish, now cracked with humility and fear. "Mom, let's talk." "At my house, tomorrow at 3 sir, come alone," I agreed, knowing that the reunion would be on my terms, not theirs. For the first time, I realized that love could be offered without being compromised. Respect had to be earned. Boundaries had to be set. And a mother's heart, no matter how vast, was not without its limits. That night, I sat in silence, reflecting on every step of the journey, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the resilience. Tears still fell, but they carried a new weight, the weight of someone who had survived, who had reclaimed dignity, and who would never allow herself to be treated as a burden again. And I whispered into the quiet of my apartment, "This is the moment I learned the true cost of love and the value of myself." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the half-open blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing lazily in my apartment. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee, my hands wrapped around it like a lifeline. The events of the past 2 months weighed heavily on my mind, but there was clarity now. I had my boundaries. I had my pride. I had my peace. And for the first time, I understood that love could exist without sacrifice of self. At precisely 2:45 p.m., the doorbell rang. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times. Every word I would speak, every line I would hold firm, I had mapped out. Slowly, I rose, smoothing the front of my blouse, and opened the door. Benjamin stood there, clutching a paper bag that smelled faintly of pumpkin and cinnamon. His eyes were red, his posture weary, but there was an unmistakable vulnerability there, too. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, as if stepping into sacred ground. "Come in," I said, keeping my tone calm, neutral. He stepped inside, his shoes scuffing lightly against the polished floor. He looked around the apartment as if noticing details he had overlooked in childhood. The framed paintings, the worn sofa, the shelves lined with books and memories. "Sit," I said, pointing to the chair across from me. He set the bag on the table and hesitated. "I tried to make it like you do," he began. "But it's probably not as good." I interrupted firmly. "The pumpkin bread isn't why you're here, Benjamin. Put the bag down. Speak plainly. Tell me why you're here." He swallowed hard and took a shaky breath. "These past 2 months have been hell, Mom. Not because of losing the house or the money, but because I realized what I did to you." I remained silent, letting him continue. "When everything fell apart, Vivian showed who she really is. She blamed me for everything. She said I should have kept you close, that I should have controlled the situation better. And I stayed silent. I let her belittle you, mock you, push you away. And I did nothing." My chest tightened. "Why, Benjamin? Why is it easier to be complicit than to defend the person who raised you?" "Because I was a coward, Mom," he admitted, voice breaking. "I was afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of losing her. I chose ease over loyalty. I chose wrong." The weight of his confession hung in the room like a thick fog. My heart ached for the son I had raised alone, the boy I had nurtured through tears and sleepless nights. But I also remembered the pain he had caused, the humiliation, the betrayal. My hands clenched into fists, but I kept them folded in my lap. "And the dressing room?" I asked quietly, the anger barely restrained. $35,000, while you claimed we couldn't pay the mortgage." His face paled. He covered his face with his hands and sobbed, not the composed, restrained cry of an adult, but the raw, unfiltered sound of a child lost in guilt and grief. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I wanted to rise and embrace him, to let the years of pain dissolve in that one gesture. But the part of me that had reclaimed dignity stayed rooted. "Sorry isn't enough, Benjamin. Sorry doesn't bring back $267,000. Sorry doesn't erase the word burden. Sorry doesn't undo the humiliation and betrayal." He lifted his face, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I know, I can't fix everything, but I want to try. I've learned my lesson. I see now that family isn't about money. Love isn't about convenience. I want to earn back your trust." I studied him carefully. This was the moment I had waited for. The choice to forgive, to set boundaries, to reclaim control. Forgiveness is not forgetting, Benjamin. And it doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. If you want a second chance, you have to earn it, and it will be on my terms. He nodded, swallowing hard, relief mingling with fear in his expression. "I understand, Mom. I'll do whatever it takes." I walked to the window, the sunlight warming my face, and took a deep breath. "Over the past 3 years, I sent you $267,000 for the mortgage and expenses, plus $95,000 for the down payment. That's a total of $362,000. I want a contract acknowledging this debt. Not to punish you, but to protect myself and to make it clear that boundaries have consequences." His eyes widened. "Mom, I can't pay that much." "Listen," I said firmly, turning to face him. "You'll repay 60% over 5 years, about $217,000, roughly $3,620 a month. If you manage that, the debt is settled. The remaining 40% I will forgive as a gift, as long as you honor your word." He nodded slowly, considering each word. "And Sophie?" he asked. "You'll see her on my terms," I said. "Not when someone decides it's convenient. Love that is conditional is not love I will accept. She can come to me, and I will always welcome her. But there will be respect, for me, for her, and for the boundaries I set. His expression softened. She loves you. She asks about you every day? Then let me love her without interference or judgment, I replied. Finally, I set the last boundary. And I won't support you financially anymore, Benjamin. You are 35. You will stand on your own. Emergencies, health or safety, I will help. But luxury, lifestyle, convenience, that is your responsibility now. He nodded, tears still wet on his cheeks. I accept everything. Good, I said. Meet with Henry on Monday. He's prepared the contract. Sign it, and then we move forward. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Then he asked softly, Can I hug you? I hesitated, but the wound still fresh, I nodded. He came forward, holding me tightly, the kind of hug a lost child gives when finally finding a lifeline. I could feel the tremble of guilt and relief in his frame, and for the first time, I knew he understood the gravity of his actions. 6 months passed. Benjamin signed the contract, sold the house, and began repaying his debt. Sophie visited on Saturdays, baking cookies, watching movies, laughing in ways that filled the apartment with life. Benjamin lived simply now in a smaller apartment, navigating life with humility and the weight of his choices pressing him toward responsibility. Vivian had disappeared, remarried to a wealthy man, leaving Benjamin to pick up the pieces he had broken himself. Lunches with Benjamin once a month became a ritual, an opportunity to rebuild trust on a foundation that respected boundaries and honored dignity. I spent more time painting again, going out with friends, savoring the small joys of life that had been denied to me while I existed as a provider, a caretaker, a shadow of myself. Each brushstroke, each laugh, each quiet moment alone was a reclamation of the life I had nearly lost to others' greed and disrespect. One evening, Sophie looked up at me with her small hands clutching mine. "Grandma, why don't you come over anymore?" I smiled gently, holding her gaze. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, we have to stay away from people who don't treat us well. Not out of anger, but out of love for ourselves." She nodded, a quiet understanding in her eyes, and hugged me tight. "I understand, Grandma. I love you." And in that hug, I felt the truest form of love. One that did not demand sacrifice. One that did not come at the cost of self-respect. One that was free, unconditional, and healing. I sat back in my chair, watching her laugh, painting in the corner of the apartment, and realized that life, with all its betrayals and heartbreaks, had also given me the most precious gift, freedom, clarity, and the courage to love on my own terms. And in that quiet, sunlit room, I whispered to myself, "This is what it means to live. This is what it means to love wisely." The days after that final meeting with Benjamin were calm, almost surreal in their quietness. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the constant tug of obligation, the unending pressure of being needed, yet never respected. Instead, there was space to breathe, to think, to live without fear of intrusion. I spent the mornings painting in the sunlit corner of my apartment, the smell of acrylics mingling with the faint scent of jasmine from the balcony flowers. Each brushstroke felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had given away unknowingly. Colors I had ignored for decades came alive on the canvas, bright blues and fiery oranges, reds that reminded me of passion and resilience, yellows that mirrored the light returning to my life. Afternoons were for long walks in the park. I watched young mothers with their children and smiled quietly, remembering my own mistakes and regrets. I didn't let guilt consume me anymore. I observed, learned, and let the sunlight warm my skin and my heart. I began journaling again, writing letters to my younger self. Letters I would never send, filled with advice, compassion, and the tough lessons life had taught me. Benjamin called weekly, not asking for money, not begging for guidance, but checking in. Sometimes we spoke for only 10 minutes. Other times, our conversations stretched over an hour, talking about Sophie, school projects, little victories, the challenges of living simply, managing bills, and slowly learning responsibility. I didn't guide him anymore. I answered when I felt it appropriate. I was a mother, yes, but not a doormat, not a bank, not a slave to guilt. Sophie's visits became the highlight of my weeks. We baked cookies together, her small hands clumsily pressing dough into shapes, leaving flour dusting every surface. She laughed freely, and sometimes her giggles reminded me of the innocence that had been almost lost amidst adult greed and manipulation. I showed her how to paint, how to sew small dolls, how to express her tiny heart without fear. In teaching her, I healed myself. One Saturday, as Sophie and I sat on the floor, painting a large canvas of a sun over a field of flowers, she paused and looked at me with her serious, childlike gaze. "Grandma, do you ever feel sad about them?" I smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes, sweetheart. But sadness doesn't have to control us. We can choose to be happy even when people hurt us. We can love without letting anyone use that love against us." Her small hand found mine, squeezing it. "I like that, Grandma." Evenings became my time for reflection. I'd sit on the balcony with a cup of tea, listening to the city hum below. The memories of betrayal, of being treated like a burden, surfaced now and then, but they no longer crushed me. They were reminders, not chains. They were lessons etched into my heart, teaching me resilience, discernment, and the courage to demand respect. I started reconnecting with friends I had neglected. We met for lunches, sometimes quiet afternoons at cafes, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. I realized how much I had missed real companionship, the kind that nourishes the soul rather than drains it. Conversations weren't about complaints or obligations, but about mutual care, laughter, and understanding. Benjamin's apartment became a symbol of his new reality. Small, modest, cluttered, but entirely his. He learned to cook, manage bills, and face the consequences of his choices. There were late nights when he called, frustrated, unsure of what to do next, but he never begged me for rescue. And each time, my pride swelled slightly, not in judgment but in quiet acknowledgement. He was learning. Slowly, painfully, he was growing. Then one afternoon, a month after Sophie's visits had become routine, Benjamin called. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of the way you handled everything. I never realized how strong you were, and I want to be like that, not just for me, but for Sophie." I felt a lump in my throat. Strength isn't about never being hurt, Benjamin. It's about knowing your worth, even when others try to make you feel small. "I think I'm starting to understand," he said softly. "I wish I could go back and do things differently." "You can't go back," I said firmly. "But you can move forward. Every choice you make from now on matters. Live with integrity. Respect the people who love you, and don't use their love as a stepping stone for your convenience." Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the balance between my past pain and present freedom became clearer. I no longer feared loneliness because I had discovered the joy of my own company. I no longer felt guilt over Sophie's father's mistakes because I had learned that responsibility begins with oneself, not in trying to correct others' moral failings. One evening, as I sat painting a portrait of Sophie laughing, I received a message from Martha. She wanted to meet, to discuss something important. My heart skipped a beat, uncertain what it could be after all these months. I agreed, cautious but curious. At the cafe, Martha looked worn but relieved to see me. "Heather, I wanted to tell you something," she began, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Benjamin has changed. Slowly, but he's learning. I see him being a father in ways I never expected. And Sophie, she's happier. I think it's because you taught her how love should feel." I felt warmth spread through me, a quiet satisfaction that came not from vindication, but from witnessing the truth. Love, when combined with respect and boundaries, could heal even the deepest wounds. "That's good to hear," I said softly. "It hasn't been easy, but it's worth it." I had to step back, let him face the consequences, and hold my boundaries. It was the only way he would truly understand the cost of his actions. Martha nodded. "And you've taught me something too, Heather. About self-respect, about strength, about how to love wisely. As we parted, I felt lighter. The weight of betrayal and hurt had transformed into lessons and hope. I walked home slowly, the evening breeze on my face, and realized that life had given me the rarest gift, clarity and peace, even in the aftermath of heartbreak. That night, as I tucked Sophie in at my apartment, she whispered, "Grandma, I'm glad you stayed strong. You're my hero." I hugged her tightly, feeling tears slide down my cheeks. "Thank you, sweetheart. But remember, heroes aren't those who never fall. They're those who stand up, even when it hurts, and choose themselves too." And in that moment, I knew that all the pain, all the betrayal, all the tears had led me here, to a life where love was no longer a chain, but a choice freely given, respected, and returned. I sat back in my chair later, looking at the moonlight reflecting on the walls of my apartment. For the first time in years, I felt whole, unshakable, and at peace. And I knew that no matter what the future held, I had learned the most important lesson of all, that love without respect is not love at all, and freedom begins where fear and obligation end. The following weeks were quieter than I had imagined. Quiet but full, not empty, not lonely, but rich with small joys I had ignored for years while being consumed by other people's demands. I woke up early each morning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the walls gold, and I would breathe deeply, letting the peace sink into my bones. Benjamin continued his journey of growth, and though he still stumbled occasionally, the difference was profound. He called less for guidance, more for conversation, or to share moments with Sophie. Each call reminded me that my love for him had to exist alongside the respect I demanded for myself. That balance wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. Sophie's presence at my apartment had become the heart of my weeks. Her laughter, the way she carefully brushed paint onto her little canvases, and the stories she told about school and friends all reminded me that innocence deserved protection, nurturing, and love, but never at the cost of my own dignity. I marveled at how quickly she learned to respect boundaries. Perhaps children sense authenticity better than adults do. Perhaps they understand the weight of respect without needing words. I started reconnecting with my community. I joined a local art class and met women who were navigating their own journeys of rediscovery. One evening, after a long class, a woman named Clara approached me. "I've been watching you paint," she said softly. "There's so much emotion in your work. I can feel the story behind each stroke." I smiled, a little embarrassed, but also proud. "Thank you. Painting has become my way to heal, to process everything I've lived through. It's my freedom," she nodded thoughtfully. "I think so many of us forget what it feels like to live for ourselves. We get so wrapped up in expectations, in the needs of others, that we lose sight of who we really are." Her words resonated deeply. I realized that this journey was about more than Benjamin or Vivian or even Sophie. It was about reclaiming the self I had lost somewhere along the way, the woman who had dreams, desires, and strength, not just a mother or grandmother defined by sacrifice. One rainy afternoon, as I sipped tea and watched the droplets trace paths down the window pane, my phone buzzed with a message from Benjamin. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready for another wave of guilt or apology. But it was different this time. It read, "Mom, I just wanted to say thank you. Not for the money, not for the house, but for teaching me about responsibility, love, and respect. I'm trying to be the man you raised me to be, even if it took me a long time to realize it." I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were tears of relief, of pride, and of understanding. I typed back simply, "Keep learning. Keep growing. That's all anyone can ask of themselves." Through all this, I had learned a new perspective on love. Love is not about being needed. Love is not about sacrifice to the point of erasure. Love is about mutual respect, about supporting growth, and about knowing when to step back so that the people you care about can learn the consequences of their choices. Unconditional love without boundaries is not love. It is vulnerability exploited. I began sharing these insights with others, writing short essays and reflections for my friends, posting small messages online about life, family, and self-respect. I encouraged discussions, not lectures, inviting people to share their stories of boundary setting and self-discovery. And slowly, I realized something. My experience, as painful as it had been, could become a gift to others. One Saturday evening, after Sophie had left for her father's apartment, I sat on the balcony with a notebook. I wrote, "It's not weakness to say no. It's courage. It's not selfish to protect your heart. It's wisdom. The hardest lessons often lead to the deepest growth." I thought about all the women and men who were living in quiet exhaustion, giving endlessly, receiving little respect, and wondering if the pain would ever end. I wanted them to know it could end. Freedom wasn't a dream. It was a choice. Respect wasn't something to beg for. It was something to demand with love. Benjamin had become a reflection of the lessons I had learned. He was still my son, still human, still flawed, but he had begun to carry responsibility, not as punishment, but as a measure of growth. Sophie flourished in this new balance, loved deeply, but not manipulated or used. And I, finally, flourished too. A few months later, I held an informal gathering in my apartment with friends and a few family members. We laughed, shared stories, and celebrated small victories. Sophie ran around, giggling, showing off the little painting she had finished. And I realized that the most important gift I had given, and received, was not money, not security, not obedience, but freedom. Freedom to love, freedom to exist, freedom to be seen and valued for who I was. That night, as I sat alone on the balcony once more, I reflected on the journey. Betrayal, exploitation, heartbreak, and tears had all been teachers. They had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, to choose self-respect over blind love, to demand dignity over indulgence. And through it all, I had discovered a deeper, richer kind of love. The kind that can coexist with boundaries, that strengthens rather than diminishes, that heals instead of harms. I also realized something critical for everyone listening. Reading or watching, your heart is precious. Protect it. Teach your children, your friends, your family, that love is not a tool to be wielded or withheld. It is sacred, but sacred does not mean endless or exploitable. Saying no, setting limits, stepping away. These are acts of courage, not cruelty. And so I end this chapter not with anger, not with regret, but with a lesson, a call to action, and a promise. Love fiercely, yes, but love wisely. Guard your heart. Teach others the value of respect, and never, ever compromise your dignity. Because the people who truly belong in your life will honor both your love and your boundaries. If you've ever struggled with giving too much, being taken for granted, or feeling unseen, remember your story matters. Your experiences, your choices, your courage, they all hold power. Share them, teach them, and above all, choose yourself. If you want to hear more stories about love, family, resilience, and the hard lessons life teaches us, stay with me. Together we'll explore the ways to love without losing ourselves, to give without surrendering dignity, and to find joy even in the aftermath of heartbreak. Subscribe, follow, and join this journey. Let's walk this path together, learning how to build love that uplifts, boundaries that protect, and lives that flourish with authenticity and courage. Because the greatest story you can ever live is the one where you reclaim yourself. And in doing so, show the world and your loved ones what true love really looks like.